So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to welcome you here at the CEVRO Institute College premises in this beautiful courtyard. Our role here is simple: to host a conference or workshop trying to compare two things: the NORDEFCO, so Nordic Defence Cooperation, together with, I would say, emerging defence cooperation within the Visegrad group. I think the key credit that we are here today should go to my colleague, the Finnish ambassador, Päivi Hiltunen-Toivo, and she will be here soon after I disappear, because it was originally the Finnish idea to hold this gathering, and I can only say, with my experience, and I'm still a bit of practitioner with the experience of being the defense minister 2.5 years, I would say it's a real timely done event. We are all expecting the upcoming European Council meeting, where defense originally was planned to be a key theme. Now, of course, it's again overshadowed by banking union, but it still remains on the agenda, and it's important. Second, the Visegrad cooperation in the last 2 years, including the ministerial meeting which I have hosted in Litoměřice last year, has spent a lot of time in bringing the Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, and the Hungarians more together in the area of defense in the age of austerity. And I think there is no other better example or model than is the Nordic cooperation. It's important structurally. The Nordic cooperation consists of the countries which are closely interconnected with the history, just the same like we in Central Europe. At the same time, they had different experiences, so there are the countries NATO only, there are the countries EU only, there are the countries both NATO and EU. They are all Atlantic, so they do not want to make NATO weaker. But certainly there is a time when Europe has to assume more responsibility with the US decision to spend less and less in defense of Europe. We just recently have heard about the 20% reduction. So we must intensify our work on the continent, and with the limited resources available, we have to do it in a cooperation, including a certain division of labor. So the Visegrad countries have to learn a lot of lessons, and without any doubts, we can learn the best lessons from our friends who had a history of a very concrete cooperation in that particular area in the past. So, welcome here. I have to excuse myself because I have some backache. You know, age is counting. So I will not be able to sit here for the whole afternoon. But certainly it's a privilege to host this event, and also to welcome here the colleague of mine in bringing this into life, the ambassador of Finland, Mrs. Hiltunen-Toivo. So please, the floor is yours.
Distinguished Mr. Vondra, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to open this seminar at CEVRO Institute today. We are not here for the first time. In April 2012, we started the series of Nordic seminars by having a seminar titled The Nordic Countries and European Integration. The initiative for that seminar came from the CEVRO Institute. In November 2012, the Nordic Embassies cooperated with the Institute of International Relations in organizing a discussion on the future of Arctic governance. And last June, we worked together with Forum 50%, a very different Czech actor, in the context of the first Women's Congress by having a seminar, The Economics of Gender Equality Nordic Experiences. By having these discussions, we wish to respond to the demand on the Czech side for hearing about experiences in Northern Europe, and at the same time to promote the Nordic profile and values. This is especially true for today's theme, regional security and defense cooperation, Nordic and Visegrad experiences. On behalf of Finland, which is currently holding the chairmanship of Nordefco, and of all Nordic embassies, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway and Sweden, I wish you all warmly welcome in today's seminar. I would also like to express my gratitude for the excellent cooperation with Czech Ministry of Defence and CEVRO Institute in organizing this event. A special welcome to representatives from our capitals. Today we shall discuss Nordic and Visegrad cooperation in the field of security and defence, and also look at the future. Both our regions have moved forward in this field, but they also have something to learn from each other. It would be interesting to compare our experiences and hopefully enlarge that into a close cooperation. Without closer defence cooperation, no European country can develop or uphold required military capabilities. To deepen our cooperation, we need trust and confidence between participating countries. It's often easier to start in smaller groupings. This can be seen all over Europe, in Benelux, Visegrad, Nordefco and Baltic. European security environment is changing again. For example, the US pivot to Asia, economic crisis which is diminishing resources of European states, and new security threats, they all call for cooperation. The upcoming European Council should provide strong guidelines for the future development of Europe's common security and defence policy, including the interaction between regional and European level. We are moving from islands of cooperation towards an archipelago of cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Vondra, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I just arrived yesterday evening from Berlin to Prague. That's nice to be here again. I didn't yet see the Christmas markets or the other things, but I think I had got a very good opportunity to moderate today, because the Christmas weather made that we lost one moderator and speaker, unfortunately, today. But we still have 5 good briefings, and I wish that you, as audience, will have a lot of questions. We are ready to answer them as good as possible. First, I would like to introduce Magnus Christiansson. Magnus holds a Master of Arts in History and Political Science from Lund University. Between 2000 and 2007, he held the position as head teacher of Political Science section at the Military Academy Karlberg, and he is currently teacher and researcher in strategic Division of Department of Security and Strategy in Försvarshögskolan. He will today brief us first about taboos and dynamics from Nordic foreign security and defense policy cooperation. Magnus.
Thank you, Colonel. It's a privilege to be here today in Prague, and I will also have a go at the Christmas market later on, hopefully when it stopped raining. So it's nice to be here, and I'm a great fan of Prague as a city, and it's going to be an interesting afternoon. Now, my plan here, if this works. Oh, thank you. My plan is to give you a brief summary of the developments, the dynamics leading up to the NORDEFCO cooperation, and also give you a few perspectives of where I think we're going to go with international defense cooperation in Europe in general, which factors I think we should look for in the future. The first thing I want to emphasize is that there is a legacy when it comes to Nordic and Scandinavian defense cooperation. Already in the 19th century, there were several attempts, declarations of solidarity, more or less sort of based on cultural bonds and an understanding of these countries as very like-minded. But as well as the initiative after the Second World War to form some kind of neutral defense pact, if such a thing is really feasible, they've all failed in several aspects. So the point I'm trying to make here is that while the Nordic countries are regarded as like-minded, this like-mindedness has never spilled over to the security and defense field, at least not in a successful way. And not least, I think we should have this in the back of our minds, that the experiences from the Second World War are really instrumental here. The Nordic countries are sort of standing back to back, but when they look out to the world, they see very different things when it comes to hard security. So it's no surprise then that the patterns of cooperation during the Cold War was mainly only in other fields than foreign and security policy. As a matter of fact, it was a bit of a taboo within the Nordic Circle even to raise those questions. So unique initiatives in many respects like the Nordic Council and the Nordic Council of Ministers, who opened up for a tight cooperation in the cultural and sort of general political field, was always beyond security questions. After the end of the Cold War, all the initiatives sort of turned into soft security cooperation. Of course, you can say that it was all a part of a security agenda, but it never touched upon the real hard military questions. And these pictures are, by the way, from some of these Nordic Dimension initiatives within the European Union. Now, so when we actually discuss Nordic defense cooperation, it is a bit of a new experience, leading back to those initiatives from the 19th century, but with some other dynamics that actually sort of drives them. You can say that it starts in 2005, 2006, and it's the two gentlemen here, these two gentlemen here. This is Håkan Syrén, the former Chad in Sweden, and this is Sverre Diesen, the Chad in Norway. And they got together eating lunch, and these two gentlemen really like each other. So there was a sort of a personal factor here. And what they found out was that, over lunch, was that they actually have so much in common when it comes to problems and challenges for their defense organizations. Basically, they're running out of money. And with the iron law of defense spending, that if you don't invest money into your defense systems, they will actually get halved over a decade or so. That was something that was hitting their organizations really hard. Their idea was to bring these questions of cooperative efforts in the Nordic framework to their respective ministers. And that was actually what they did. So in 2007, actually under the Swedish defense minister, there were started to be regular meetings between defense ministers. So we can notice here that the Nordic defense cooperation was actually sort of expert-driven. It was driven by experts, handed over to the politicians, who then sort of gave a go-ahead sign. And now I would say that given this dynamic, the driving force of economy, most defense ministers in the Nordic Circle actually believe that everything is possible as soon as you don't sort of step into Article 5 territory. What happened then was a series of initiatives, the NordSUP, which is sort of supportive arrangements in the Nordic Circle. Already from the Cold War, there was a limited cooperation regarding peace support operations. And then there was another initiative called NORDAC for procurement questions. All these initiatives were sort of put together in a structure that we today call NORDEFCO, Nordic Defence Cooperation. Also, in 2009, former Defense and Foreign Secretary in Norway, Thorvald Stoltenberg, he got the task from the other foreign ministers to write a report about how to develop the Nordic defense cooperation. And his 13 points were discussed among the Nordics. His 13 point per se, as the last point in his report, was some idea of a Nordic solidarity declaration, Nordic solidarity clause. The Nordic countries have been very hesitant to go that way. The NATO members are hesitant because of it might undermine NATO solidarity. But in 2011 there was a declaration about to act in a spirit of solidarity in the Nordic law, in the Nordic framework. But of course, the Nordic countries were not the only ones that experienced these problems. And so the term mentioned before was islands of cooperation. This is an expression coined by Thomas Walaszek, and it's very illustrative of the development over the last 4 or 5 years. So we have the Weimar Initiative. We have, of course, the bilateral agreement, the Lancaster House Agreement between the UK and France. The NORDEFCO initiatives, and of course the V4. And of course today what we're going to do this afternoon is to discuss and compare these different efforts. And what is typical for the Nordic initiative is that it connects some kind of, it's not an organization. It's every time I speak to people working with NORDEFCO, they remind me it's not an organization, but however it is organized. So there are working groups, and this is on expert level among officers in the headquarters, and they are organized in different working groups pertaining different cooperative areas. This one is actually scrapped right now, but it doesn't mean that the cooperative groups doesn't have any specific meaning itself. The idea is now actually to emphasize the COPAs, the cooperative groups, in order to put pressure on concrete results. But we can see it's not only the experts, it's connected in regular meetings on all levels leading up all the way to the ministers themselves. And the idea is, of course, not to create a defensive pact. The idea is, this is very illustrative, is to take the national resources and to put them together into more rational force production when it comes to logistics, when it comes to training, when it comes to exercises, things that actually build capabilities. So that when these capabilities are sort of created or developed, they can be used for the different nations in their respective frameworks. So, in a sense, what it leads to is greater cooperation, more bang for the buck, but the plan is not to involve the respective countries in binding commitments. Now, I've created a framework to study pooling, sharing, and cooperative efforts in defense. And I distinguish between 5 different forms of cooperative efforts. When it comes to pooling and sharing and task and role sharing, you can actually speak of some kind of cost-benefit calculation. That is, the more you actually give up as a country, the more you will gain, but it will also cost you more politically. So, and then you have a number of factors who influence this gains calculation. That is solidarity, whether you think that the other ones are investing as much politically in this as you are as an individual country, strategic similarities, and also geographic location is factors in this. And when we look at Nordefco, we notice that despite all the rhetoric and despite all the fancy declarations, most of the initiatives are actually on a very basic level. That is, it is actually a very low political cost, but it actually gives you very little economically. An example of this is the exercise patterns between air forces up in the north, between mainly Finland, Sweden, and Norway. What you can gain is, of course, more advanced exercises. By pooling your assets, you can do more together. But it doesn't really solve any fundamental problems for your organization when it comes to critical mass. So if you want to step up a cooperation, you move to the next level, and there we have like a battle group, which means that you delegate certain assets to a body, and what you gain is, of course, certain procedures when it comes to planning. But on the other hand, you take a little more of your investments and put it into a regional or an international body. And of course, full-scale role and task sharing, that would mean that you actually, an international organization is actually owning the asset, like the AWACS aircrafts. When it comes to procurement, of course, you have the option to co-develop. That is that you actually, like the F-35, you chip in money and then you actually sort of gain economies of scale. And the other alternative is, of course, that you actually from the beginning procure for an international organization. When it comes to the dynamics and drivers, what is typical for Nordefco is this connection. It's an open-ended cooperation. It's not like the British-French deal, which is very much guided by certain areas that needs to be fulfilled. In this setting, it is the experts who can actually sort of delegate questions and issues and ideas up to the politicians, whereas the politicians have the opportunity to actually sort of direct and take initiatives that takes the cooperation further. So it's dynamic. It's open-ended. There is no real end for where the countries are going. And the interesting thing here, especially as a political scientist, is that it might create what we call the logic of unintended consequences. You start in one area, it succeeds, it builds trust, it makes the politicians more interested, the politicians could then open up another chapter, and so it goes. It reminds us a bit about the structure that the European Union had in the 1950s and 60s, where you had expert cooperation in different areas spilling over to other areas. So this is what I would say is a defining characteristic for Nordefco. Oh, sorry. When it comes to future patterns, I believe that there are three different scenarios for defense cooperation in Europe in the transatlantic setting. The first one is, unfortunately, the one I think we're heading for, and that is something I call a minimal defense cooperation, which means that the countries in Europe, they don't really trust each other. They rather go for their national solutions. They rather put money in their own industries, etc., etc. That will lead to a de-bellicization. In 20, 30 years, most European countries will not be able to field coherent armed forces anymore. This is already happening. And you can call it also some kind of specialization by default, because certain capabilities will just disappear because you can't afford them. Of course, it leads that to the fact that there are no common institutions. And for a country like Sweden, of course, this means that we need to rethink the fact that we're not part of a larger military alliance. How can we... The credibility for being non-aligned is, of course, dependent on the fact that you have capabilities yourself. The other option is that you get some kind of flexible defense cooperation, which means that it's not on the EU level or NATO level, but that these bodies actually sort of facilitate the islands of cooperation in their building of trust and building of capabilities. That will lead more to some kind of specialization by design. That is, that the countries can actually negotiate which capabilities to keep, etc. I don't think we're heading there, but that would certainly be a helpful development. And I think that the V4 could be such a structure that operates within an EU-NATO framework. The last alternative is perhaps the most ambitious one, and I think that Nordefco actually has a potential. I'm not saying that it's heading that way, but it has a potential of going that way, and that would be regional security integration. The fact that cooperation spills over to new areas would actually sort of stimulate a continuous integration. It would, in the first instance, it would lead to a de facto dependency between the countries, not recognized in treaties. And later on, it would actually be the only thing that could save capabilities between countries like the Nordic countries. But unlike the ideas in the Visegrad 4, it's actually built on an idea of an eventual institutionalization. If countries create and coordinate capabilities, they need to have bodies and mechanisms to control them. You need to have some kind of House of Lords that actually controls and coordinates strategy between different countries. And that would lead to a de facto integration. Are we heading there? I don't think so. But please note that regardless of which way we're heading in these three scenarios, we are likely to see things in European defense that we've never seen before. And in that sense, I believe that we're actually in the middle of an overarching paradigm shift. Because if we pool and share, we will actually sort of dissolve the connection between state sovereignty and armed forces. We will actually produce armed forces on an international scale to use them nationally. So that's something new. If we don't do it, we will actually see European states that are not able to perform in international military operations, and we've never seen that before either. So, a last normative call from a political science to decision makers or diplomats is that it is time that we actually take this paradigm shift seriously. Because if we just pretend that eventually there were billions of dollars going to move into our defense systems again, we are going to lose out. And that means that we're moving to all those frightful scenarios that so many scholars have been talking about. A Europe that is strategically marginalized, etc., etc. So this is a call for the decision makers to take this extremely seriously, and you have to risk something in order to gain something, and that is, I think, my normative call. And with those words, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Magnus. Now we are moving from the northern island to the Central European island. And I would like to introduce you Jan Jires. He is the Deputy Director of the Defense Policy and Strategy Division at Czech Ministry of Defence. He is also a lecturer in International Relations and Security Studies in Charles University and known as adjunct fellow for Centre for European Policy Analysis in DC, and many people know him also from the former duty as the director for the Prague Centre for Transatlantic Relations at here in CEVRO. Jan, the floor is yours.
Well, good. Okay, I should not speak so loudly. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today, and I'm really pleased to see so many people actually attending this seminar, because regional defense cooperation, and actually not only regional defense cooperation within the Central European region, but also inter-regional cooperation, hopefully between the Nordic region and the Central European region, is one of the projects or areas in which we are, or to which we are very much committed at the Czech Ministry of Defence, and this is really something we are very much focused on. And right now we are working on, for example, increasing the quality and intensity of Czech-Swedish bilateral defence cooperation. So we really first see a great potential in both regional defence cooperation and, in particular, cooperation between Central Europe and the Nordic region. And at the same time, this seminar is really very suitable or very topical from our point of view, because actually it is supposed to discuss the very issues and the very ideas that we are now trying to implement, albeit on a much more restricted or smaller scale with Sweden right now. So thank you again for organizing this event, which actually has been. Yeah, you can close it down. Which has been, for which I should thank CEVRO Institute, which actually used to be, or still is to some extent, an institution with which I am affiliated, and the Finnish Embassy for paying for the show, and not only Finnish Embassy as far as I know, but other Nordic embassies as well. I'll try to, because actually just half a year ago I used to teach at this school, and I used to teach at Charles University, and I was an academician. Now I represent the Czech Ministry of Defence here, so I'll try to be not exceedingly academic in what I will be talking about. I'm really happy that Magnus actually has covered in a very systematic way many important aspects of regional defense cooperation in Europe, so I don't need to go into details on many of these issues that have been already covered by Magnus, and I'll focus just on a few issues which, in my opinion, are really important when it comes to the current state of play of the Visegrad defense cooperation and for the future of regional defense cooperation in Central Europe. First, I would like to say a few words about three interconnected general issues related to Visegrad defense cooperation. The first issue is why regional cooperation now? The second issue is why we for defense cooperation now? And the third issue is what are the downsides or hindrances to successful regional defense cooperation? So that's that will be a first part of my contribution, and then I would like to focus on three specific issues which seems to me to be particularly important when it comes to practical V4 defense cooperation. Three issues that actually that we at the Defense Ministry have come across repeatedly as really the focal points of what we are trying to achieve when it comes to Visegrad defense cooperation. And these three issues are the issue of defense planning, or harmonizing or synchronizing defense planning and acquisition plans. And the second issue is the project of establishing the V4 EU battle group that, as you probably know, should be ready for deployment in the first half of 2016, and which so far has been by far the biggest, if not the only, V4 defense cooperation project. And the third issue I would like to briefly talk about is the area that actually is most prominent when it comes to defense, regional defense cooperation, and which might be in the future a really a focal point of regional defense cooperation in our region, and it is cooperation in air defense and air policing. So this is just very briefly the structure of what I would like to say in my opening remarks. So turning to the first issue, why regional, or the first question, why regional cooperation now? Well, everyone has been talking about regional defense cooperation in Europe for the past couple of years, and it seems that it is one of the hottest issues in debates, on European security on both NATO and EU level. And it's true that a lot of attention has been given to this issue. The practical results are much less convincing so far, and this is unfortunately true of both Visegrad defense cooperation and the Nordic defense cooperation. Of course, we need to talk about it. We need first to build trust among the countries that are supposed to cooperate. We need to discuss the problems we face in order to be able to tackle them. That's all true, and this is all necessary, before even trying to think of implementing some tangible projects in maybe integrating military units, maybe in doing joint procurement projects and so on. But for many people and for many critics, and I wouldn't dare to argue with them, the talking has been too long, and too little has been done in practice so far. And if you really look, in a critical way on what has been achieved in both Central European and Nordic defense cooperation, you will find out that very, very little actually. There has been very little. There have been very few practical procurement projects that have been successful, if any. When it comes to building joint units, then we had some bad experience from the 1990s. There is still a lot of hesitation and skepticism in the region about the utility and meaningfulness of building joint military units regionally, and so on. So we still face a lot of problems, a lot of practical problems, and it sometimes can be very frustrating for people, to hear all the time, again and again, about the necessity of regional defense cooperation, and then finding out that actually nothing tangible, or almost nothing tangible, has actually been achieved. But it seems to me that nowadays, we are really, at a turning point, that after those 3-4 years of discussions and consultations, we are finally moving, and probably this is true of the Nordic defense cooperation as well. We are moving into a phase of practical implementation of some of these projects, and these and the preparatory stage, the talking, of which I have been talking, of course, has been necessary. Because one of the surprising issues for everyone who starts to be interested in regional defense cooperation is that really the level of trust among those countries in question is not high enough to allow for some more ambitious regional defense projects. And this is surprisingly true of both Central Europe and, as far as I know, and our Nordic colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, this has been the issue in the Nordic region as well. That simply regional defense cooperation is such a sensitive issue. Pooling and sharing of capabilities is such a sensitive issue that not even the existing level of trust in the north is enough in many cases to actually allow for some of the more ambitious projects. So we really need to talk constantly about it and step by step, build sufficient trust so that, in a couple of years, we may be ready to actually implement some of those regional pooling and sharing projects, which, of course, as I said, is very, very politically sensitive because it means that you have to compromise your sovereignty a little bit. You have to rely on other countries for your defense, which traditionally has been a domain of a jealously guarded domain of national sovereignty. You need to be sure that your neighbors, your partners in regional defense cooperation will, in times of crisis or in times of need, provide you with the capacities and capabilities they have promised to you, and vice versa. They, at the same time, must be sure that you will be able and willing to provide the capacities and capabilities you have promised to them in times of crisis and in times of need. So it seems that even in those regions of Europe that are very close to each other politically, or actually within which the neighboring countries are very close to each other politically and culturally, the existing level of trust is not sufficient enough, and we still need a lot of work to do and a lot of trust-building measures to be implemented before actually we can proceed with practical cooperation. So why regional cooperation now? To go back to my first question, probably the most important reason is that the European security landscape has been changing rather dramatically over the past couple of years. Of course, this, to many people in this room, this probably sounds as a terrible cliché, because changes in European security has been discussed for the past 800 years, probably, and definitely for the past 23 years since the end of the Cold War. But it seems to me, and not only to me, that actually those changes that have been underway over the past 3-5 years have been rather dramatic. First of them, the United States has been redefining its position and role in European security. I won't go into much of a detail here because it is still a very sensitive issue, and it is very sensitive what kind of words actually you select to describe this process. Some people would even call it U.S. strategic withdrawal or U.S. strategic restraint, or you can read all kinds of terms of how to describe it. I'll be more diplomatic and neutral in saying that simply the United States role and position in European security is changing, and the U.S. is redefining its involvement in European defense and security. This means a lot of things for Europeans, and one of the most important of them is that actually they are now expected to be much more active in managing security in Europe's vicinity than before. We cannot expect the United States to lead crisis management operations in Europe and in Europe's vicinity as they did in the 1990s in the Balkans. We are now expected actually to take care of European security on our own, or in a much greater way than previously. The second factor, budget cuts and, to put it more generally, economic stagnation, financial crisis, institutional crisis in Europe since 2008. Many countries, including this one, have experienced dramatic defense budget cuts. And of course, in such a situation, we necessarily need to look for alternative ways of how to secure military capabilities we need. And of course, regional defense cooperation has been considered for some time already. as one of the most promising tools of how to keep and develop necessary military capabilities that we need. And the third factor of why European security has been changing over the past few years, well, it seems that finally many people in Europe and many people in European governments have realized how fragile European security is and how important these emerging threats that actually are coming from this very long and wide stripe of instability that exists around Europe. How important these threats coming from that region are? Europe is a rich bubble surrounded by one of the world's most unstable regions, stretching from Western Africa across the Sahel, the Middle East, the Caucasus, up to Central Asia. So Europe at the same time is one of the richest and most prosperous and politically most decent places in the world, but at the same time it neighbors to one of the most unstable and one of the poorest and one of the most violent regions of the world. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to invest sufficient efforts and funds and resources to actually be ready for threats that are arriving from our immediate neighborhood. So regional cooperation is simply about adding another layer of cooperation to the traditional modes of cooperation, which has been, of course, either pan-European within NATO or EU or bilateral. The point of regional defense cooperation is complementing the existing or traditional modes of international or multinational cooperation, making the cooperation, the web of cooperation, thicker than it used to be. To put it differently, regional defense cooperation is, among other things, a sort of an insurance policy, because the traditional ways of protecting our security and the traditional institutions may not be as efficient or as reliable in 15 or 20 years from now as what we have been used to so far. So simply adding additional layer of cooperation, the regional layer, is, as I said, a sort of an insurance policy, among other things, of course. And we see this in the north, at least partly, when it comes to this Nordic defense solidarity clause. My second question, very briefly, why V4 defense cooperation? First, the reason is the desire to utilizing the existing level of cooperation and trust that have existed among the V4 countries since at least 1989. We share an important part of our historical experience. We, to a great extent, understand each other because of this shared historical experience, and of course, we believe that this provides a good ground for cooperation in the future. Another factor is that the countries of Central Europe have, to some extent at least, similar or at least compatible strategic cultures, which, of course, this can be discussed. There may be people in the room actually believing that it is not that, similar, and that national strategic cultures in Central Europe are actually quite far from each other. We can discuss this in the debate that will follow shortly. But I still would argue that the Visegrad strategic cultures are rather close to each other compared to some of the countries on the other side of Europe. Another factor is another impetus for actually developing Visegrad defense cooperation is the desire on the part of all the Visegrad countries to utilize the Visegrad label that has been internationally established for some time, and I would dare to say that it has been rather respected internationally. Actually to this issue is connected the fact that we have been, from the outside, considered as a region. You may disagree with it, you may dislike it, but it is a fact that by many important players in European security and international politics, simply our region has been treated as a region and has been expected to act as a region. And it would not be politically wise, actually, to totally disappoint these people by not doing anything in Visegrad cooperation and Visegrad defense cooperation as well. My third question: what are the downsides of regional defense cooperation? From my perspective, the biggest danger is fragmenting the pan-European security organizations, meaning especially NATO and the European Union. Of course, this is sort of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we expect regional defense cooperation to help NATO and the European Union to be stronger and to be better prepared for security threats we face. We consider regional defense cooperation as a sort of a boost for both NATO and the European Union. But at the same time, regional defense cooperation may be a risk to these organizations because there is a risk that actually NATO and the European Union will fragment into closed regional clubs of countries that do projects together, but not across Europe and not with other countries outside those regions. So this is a risk. Regional defense cooperation is potentially a risk for NATO and EU's unity and pan-European solidarity, or how to put it. Which means that there should be some geographic flexibility in regional defense cooperation. And you can, of course, see it when it comes to Visegrad defense cooperation as well. We don't confine regional defense cooperation purely on V4 format. We want to make regional defense cooperation project-driven, meaning that if we have a sensible project, we try to recruit those countries that are most interested in it and that would be most useful to have them on board. Another downside or hindrance or difficulty with regional defense cooperation, and I have already covered that, is the insufficient level of trust. And I would actually qualify it even more, or actually talk even more in a more concrete terms. What I mean here is the lack of predictability and stability. To put it differently, we have problems with actually enforcing commitments that have been made. This is maybe wrongly put because we don't even know whether these commitments should be enforceable. And if yes, how they should be enforced. Just think of how national defense planning works. For example, in this country, we don't know what our defense budget will be in 3 or 4 years' time from now in this country. So our own defense planning within the national context is rather unpredictable and volatile, and we cannot really be sure what we will have money for in a couple of years' time. And just multiply this by 4 when it comes to Visegrad defense cooperation. So you have 4 different national systems of defense planning and defense budgeting, and all of them, or most of them, actually 3 of them, Poland is the only exception, are rather unpredictable and not really stable when it comes to a longer term perspective. So this is a big problem, and there have been a lot of discussions about what to do to make the regional defense commitments enforceable. Maybe every single regional defense project will have to have a form of a formal intergovernmental treaty with sanctions included in it, penalties for non-compliance. But at the same time, this is hardly, this will hardly fly, politically speaking, in one or more of these countries in question. So this is still a big problem we are facing. Because I'm running out of my time, I'll be just very brief on the second set of issues I wanted to talk about, namely defense planning, Visegrad EU battle group, and air policing. When it comes to defense planning, I think this is the core of it all. We now know that harmonizing or synchronizing defense planning is really a prerequisite for successful regional defense cooperation, and not only regional. Of course, we can say the same about pan-NATO or pan-EU multinational defense cooperation and capabilities development. Because if we don't have a harmonized or synchronized defense planning, we cannot realistically expect that many of these defense projects will actually be designed and implemented. If there is a successful project without synchronized or harmonized defense planning, it will be a result of pure chance, not a result of a systematic approach to regional or multinational defense cooperation. So we now know that we must work really hard on synchronizing or harmonizing defense planning. Of course, it starts with actually informing each other, with meeting each other frequently, consulting each other frequently about what our national defense plans are, what our acquisition and procurement plans are, and actually Visegrad Group has been a bit of a latecomer in this regard, because we know from many defense partnership from Western and Northern Europe that actually these mutual consultations about defense planning have been underway for decades. Military planners, seconded military planners or military planners sitting at other countries' defense ministries, British defense planners sitting in Paris, French defense planners sitting in London, the same going on in other regions of Europe, in Benelux countries, I believe, in the north as well. So we've been in Central Europe a bit of latecomers, but actually we've concluded that a much better way of how to synchronize or harmonize our defense plans is actually having frequent enough and formalized working groups within which national planners from national defense ministries would meet regularly with having a formalized regular agenda and exchanging information about the national defense plans. It seems to us at the moment to be a much more efficient way of how to harmonize or synchronize our defense planning than these exchanges of planners between ministries. I'm not saying that this is useless. Of course, exchanging defense planners between different countries would definitely lead to a greater level of trust between the countries. But from purely practical perspective, it seems to us nowadays that it is much more efficient to have these working groups in which regularly, several times a year, national planners convene to discuss their procurement plans and defense planning in general. So we have started Czech-Slovak working groups on these issues already 2 years ago, if I'm correct, or 1 year ago. And now actually this year we have started Czech-Polish working groups. And these working groups always include one working group on defense planning. So we are aware that actually to achieve tangible regional defense cooperation, defense planning is really a necessary prerequisite, and we are working on it. But you can also see that when it comes to regional defense cooperation, it is very often useful actually to start with bilateral relationships and only subsequently to expand them to cover more countries and to make them a truly regional defense cooperation. So these working groups on defense planning actually has been so far only bilateral, Czech-Slovak, Czech-Polish, but of course we hope that over time they will develop into a really regional endeavor. So starting with bilateral cooperation and expanding them to the regional format is probably in many cases the way to go. And my last, actually, I'll skip the EU battle group. We may discuss it. Just maybe one sentence on on Visegrad EU battle group. We have, I mean, we like the European Union are supposed to have 4 battle groups a year. So I would not put so much emphasis on building, one Visegrad battle group for 2016. In itself, it cannot be a very big achievement on its own. It will be just one of 4 battle groups in 16. Sorry, if the roster is filled properly. So we need to think about how to make the Visegrad EU battle group something more, something that deserves to be considered as a good example of regional defense cooperation. And the fact is that preparing or building the Visegrad EU battle group has so far been the only tangible example of Visegrad defense cooperation. We don't really have anything else. And at the same time, as I said, it is nothing spectacular because we, the European Union, are supposed to have 40 different battle groups every 10 years. So we really need to think of how to, as I said, of how to turn the V4 EU battle group into something bigger, something more permanent, something more, something with more impact. So first of all, we want to build a model EU battle group, because as you may know, currently we are in the process on the European level of actually discussing what the future of battle groups should be, how to reform the very concept of battle groups to actually make it a more efficient and useful tool of the CSDP. And it seems to me that actually building the Visegrad battle group, we should make it a part of this broader debate about the future of battle groups in Europe in general. So it should be a model battle group that should actually be built on some of those changes that are proposed on the European level when it comes to reforming the battle group concept as such. And secondly, we should think about making the Visegrad battle group a bit more permanent. And there are a couple of ways of how to do it. And nowadays, actually, there seems to be a consensus emerging consensus among the Visegrad countries that actually the way to go is actually the way the Nordics have already taken, meaning actually offering the V4 battle group to the roster every maybe 3-4 years, so that the knowledge and the know-how acquired, during the build-up of the first Visegrad battle group for 2016 is not lost, but actually can be used in the future repeatedly. And this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
So then we move back to the north. I just called Arto-Pekka during the weekend and got the message that about the weather situation, but maybe you tell more about what was the situation back in Finland. Both the regions have their own weather conditions, own political conditions, but I thank you, Arto, for being here. Arto is working as a Secretary General of Nordic Defence Cooperation for this year. Previously, he has worked in Armoured Brigade as a defense attaché in Paris and for some operations like KFOR.
Thank you, Mr. Vondra, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It was beautiful in Finland. It was snowing, -10 degrees, and sun was shining, not raining. It was snowing. But anyway, it is a great pleasure to be here and in Prague and to give you some Nordefco, let's say, hard facts, sound from the field, so to say. I have been involved in a Nordefco business since it started 4 years ago in various positions, in different working groups, cooperation areas, and now as the Secretary General, watching how the Nordefco is going on. And in my presentation, I will concentrate on military level, mainly, but if you have any concerns from the policy level, I hope I can answer, but mainly military level. And it was requested that there should be a chairman's view, but I'm happy to say that the chairman's view in our Nordic cooperation is very often all nations' view. We share the same goals. Of course, we have some national spices in our cooperation. This is my agenda. I try to be very short, and I sense that there's a need for a cup of coffee. So this is the agenda, Nordefco structure. It was partly shown by my Swedish colleague, but I will go a bit deeper to the military level. And Nordefco achievements. You gentlemen, dear colleague, you said that there is no tangible results. Okay, you can say so, but we do have some results, achievements. I will show some of those. They are even concrete results. And then if we are aiming for deeper capability cooperation, we have faced quite a many and crucial challenges. And this is MCC, meaning Military Coordination Committee's chairman's Lieutenant General Mika Peltonen. He's a Finnish general. His views he delivered to the policy level that he is not happy because the things are not proceeding. And then there was also mentioned by the previous lecture the third parties and regional cooperation. I will shortly explain you about the third-party policy in Nordefco. And summary is the chairman's view part. It was presented by our General Peltonen to our defense ministers 4th of this month. And of course it was agreed in other capitals, but it was his own views mainly. This is Nordefco, and as it was mentioned by my Swedish colleague, we had quite a many different Nordic actors. We had the Nordac, that was armament cooperation, Nordcaps for the peace support operations, and Nordsup, it was the capability development areas. But all these many areas became one, and Nordefco was established 4 years ago. So we even have the birthday for Nordefco. And the framework, as mentioned previously, not an organization, but framework was established 2010. Just to remind you what is the purpose of Nordefco, regional defense cooperation, it is to strengthen the participant national defense, explore common synergies, and facilitate efficient common solutions. And in MOU is stated that there should be a comprehensive Nordic defense cooperation, comprehensive. And what is that in a military terms? We have to save money, find cost-saving things, so to say. We need to find some operational, functional effectiveness. More effective actions with the same amount of people, same amount of money to be more effective. These are the military words when we simplify the MOU text. Framework is shown here. This is a framework. It is not an organization. It is a structure. And we, at least on the military level, we see NORDEFCO as a facilitator. We are here to identify common areas of cooperation. We are to coordinate those areas. We are to report to the political level if it's going good or bad or something should be deleted. And basically, here is the key picture for the military level. It shows where the work is done. The NORDEFCO military level is led by 4 generals. It is a military coordination committee from 4 nations, major generals or lieutenant generals. And now there is a Finnish flag because it's our chairmanship year this year. Next year it will be Norway. And under these gentlemen, generals, there's a small coordination staff, approximately 20 people working for those people. In 3 capitals, Helsinki, Stockholm and Oslo, we have exchange officers working for NORDEFCO, 100% for NORDEFCO. They are exchange officers working in these national headquarters, defense staff, and they participate in different actions like strategic planning, procurement issues. They can be project managers. They are really embedded. They are involved in NORDEFCO work. These are actually the people who are earmarked for the NORDEFCO work. Only 20 people approximately. The generals, they have their other obligations and duties, though, so they are not working on a daily basis in this organization or structure. And here you can see these previously mentioned cooperation areas. We have 5 of those. The new one is the cooperation area armament. It was established this November because we noticed that there's a need for procurement cooperation. We used to have one cooperation area called strategic development, but we have so good relationship and connection between our capitals, so it can be on the subject expert issue. We don't need a cooperation area for that. But procurement, that definitely needs a cooperation area. And here you can see the lead nations, either rotating principle, 2 years for each nation to take care of one COPA, to nominate an officer rank of colonel to be responsible for the outcome. And the Arrow interest area forums, it is also very important because NORDEFCO is not an organization, it is a structure. They don't own the people, we don't have the money, so we are only facilitating our common projects. So the key stakeholders, the people who actually have the money and the people, all the resources, they are, for example, the service chiefs, Air Force commanders, Land Force commanders, Navy commanders. So they are involved in the structure by these interest area forums. And it is very practical. They are not left outside. And now I would like to underline one very important thing for the V4 cooperation also. This structure is actually doing nothing. It is only, as I mentioned, facilitating and sensing the pulse. The real work is done in each nation, in each armed forces, in line organization. That is where the work is done. And the crucial connection to the line organization is here, these cooperation areas, because those people who work, for example, in strategic planning or procurement in our respective armed forces, they work also in these boxes and these cooperation areas. So there's a connection between the line organization and the work to be done. Then a few words about achievements. And to be honest, achievements or results, so far, they have been mainly operational or functional. Mentioned previously, Air Force cross-border training in Lapland, in Northern Europe. It is very fruitful, saving money, and then you have added value when you have a big fleet of airplanes and air jets training together. Then we have these different kind of exercises, artillery, air defense exercises, and of course in crisis management operations, for example in ISAF, we have some joint capabilities, especially in logistics side, and when we are flying from Finland to Afghanistan, we are flying together with the Danes Swedes, Norwegians, so we are saving money. We are doing things together. Then we are sharing responsibilities in training and education. Crisis management operations personnel are trained in Nordic countries, for example, military police in Sweden, observers in Finland, and logisticians in other countries, for example, Denmark. So we are sharing this responsibility. And it has been ongoing for years, and it is a very fruitful cooperation. Then this terrible SOFMED EDU, meaning Special Operation Forces Medical Education, started this October, the 1st of October in Sweden. It has already saved for Finland 185,000 euros. And if you calculate all 4 nations, and other nations are sending more people, they were sending to US to have this training, it can be counted in millions of euros in years to come. Not too much, but something that is concrete and saving money. And then, of course, we have this combined joint Nordic and the new word Baltic exercise program. We have, so to say, our dear neighbors, Baltic states, together with us. We have made a calendar or program of exercises. It is a pick and choose. If you don't want to organize an exercise yourself, you can go and ask, could I join your exercise? And sometimes it can even give you an added value. It can be better than your own exercise. And then I have to be honest, in capability cooperation area, not too much. For example, Finland, we have had some surplus material, APCs, armored personnel carriers from Sweden, tracked snow vehicles from Norway, a lot of money saved, and the other fellows, they got rid of the old material, and we are happy, they are happy. Then we have, let's say, the more or less common Nordic air defense system. We have a data exchange, we have radars, ground-based air defense systems, and Nordic exercises, Nordic helmet. We are exercising together. But capability cooperation is the area where all the significant financial benefits, they could be found and gained. But it is, at the same time, the most complicated area, as stated before this afternoon. And why is that? If we are aiming for deeper capability cooperation, here are some challenges that my general identified and put on a table for the ministers and policy level. As you can see, we are in different groups. Here you can say Norway in this box, Sweden, Finland here, Denmark and Iceland. So the playground is not easy. And then we have quite a big differences in our national legislation, decision-making process. They are different. In some countries, defense forces are quite separate from the MOD, like in Sweden and Finland, but Norway and Denmark, they are more close. So there are some not challenges, but differences. Funding, procurement processes, development processes, plan processes, and of course, interpretation of legislation. And then, of course, to be honest, in some cases, there's a connection to national defense industry. It can be very close, and then you have to think it is beneficial to go with a Nordic solution, or do we have to support our national industry? So it is a bit tricky. But to be honest, these challenges cannot be solved by military level alone. These are out of our league, so to say. But now this has been for 10 months on the political level, and they have taken this seriously, and they have initiated some measures to solve already identified challenges, and especially in the areas of procurement processes and development plans processes. These are the two areas which are going quite well today. But once again, to be honest, a lot of work is still to be done. We are not there yet. Then third parties and NORDEFCO. There are three main principles. It has to be win-win situation. If you join, you have to win, we have to gain something. Case by case, there's no automatic automation that if you once can participate, for example, in some procurement program, you are not automatically involved for the future projects or different projects. And it's an invitation only. We have the veto in NORDEFCO. If we don't feel it's a good one, we don't have to accept it. 3 main principles. And as mentioned, point of entry is always the chair nation, and next year it will be Norway. And today we have a cooperation with, especially with the Baltic countries, veteran issues. Denmark is leading that one. Gender cooperation, it is one of the Swedish flagships. ADL, Norwegian-led, and then Finland and Sweden with the exercise plan we are supporting and cooperating with our Baltic colleagues. And there's a very interesting approach coming from the Netherlands. They wanted to be as an observer in NORDEFCO, but we don't have an observer status in NORDEFCO. We have only members and third parties. So, as a pragmatic country, the Netherlands are doing a study. They are approaching each and every one of our 5 cooperation areas and identifying possible cooperation possibilities. So it is a very pragmatic approach. We have not given any promises, and they are doing the normal let's say, the planning work, if there might be some possibilities. And of course, US has shown a lot of interest to join our cross-border training and exercise up north. And finally, the summary. This has been presented to our defense ministers early this month as a German sphere, as I mentioned, and the other nations, Nordic nations, they agreed, supported his comments. And the first one states that Nordic cooperation has become more systematic and goal-oriented, and I think that's a big value. We are seen very often as a Nordic group of countries. NORDEFCO flags are shown very often in a NORDEFCO corner, in a NORDEFCO context. And NORDEFCO has been recognized as an interesting partner to cooperate with, the Netherlands, for example. And day-to-day cooperation and exchange of information has increased considerably. For example, my planners, if they find out something that might be any interest of, for example, with Swedes, they pick up the phone and they call our Swedish colleagues, or Danes or Norwegians. And Nordic thinking in our nations has increased. Of course, in line organization, the simple soldiers along the eastern border in Finland and the people up north in Norway, they don't sense the Nordic cooperation in their daily work, to be honest. But they know what is NORDEFCO, and that's already a good start. Okay, but everything's not perfect. The structure needs to be developed. Sweden has made a good positive step reducing bureaucracy. Our Nordic troops can quite easily enter to Sweden to train and exercise. In Finland we are not so good, but we are catching the Swedes. So our cooperation and structure needs to be developed to be more efficient and to have more tangible and concrete results. And of course, there's a need to strengthen the link between NORDEFCO and national line organization. As I refer to our guys and girls up north, we should feel that the line organization, they are making the results in our cooperations. And just to challenge my Czech colleague, I would say that we don't have any big results, but we have results. And saying that there are no results, that's not correct. And I must say that I quote one of my Swedish colleagues, because I very often talk about Swedes because they are very good in calculating things and they are very good with statistics. They have, if I call it correctly, they have 133 Nordic projects ongoing, and 70 of those are multilateral and 63 are bilateral. Or it can be vice versa, but just gives you the example that the cooperation is ongoing, it is existing, and it is fruitful. Although we are not saving millions and we are not sending common battalions, not yet. So this concludes my presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I look at the program, we have coffee break, but I think we have still time for a couple of questions or comments. I think, Magnus, you wanted...
Just a short comment on Jan's remark regarding regarding fragmentization as a potential problem for pooling and sharing, I don't really share that concern, because the great problem for European security is that European countries will be unable to participate in international missions altogether. So that is the overarching problem, and that we don't have relevant capabilities to work together with the Americans. So in that sense, I think that pooling and sharing is not the big problem in this area, and that it would disturb fragmentization in Europe. Nationalist parties and nationalist policies is, of course, fragmenting the European area, but not pooling and sharing efforts themselves. And also, I would like to emphasize that the fact that why do we have islands of cooperation? Why don't we have the European Union and NATO as cooperative bodies? The fact that Brussels today is very poisonous. The fact that it's impossible to get a British foreign minister actually to cooperate with a German counterpart, etc., etc., etc. That is the reason why countries actually search cooperative efforts outside of Brussels. So in that sense, I believe that in attacking the problem as an overarching European problem, we will actually sort of reach a number of dead ends. And that will lead to strategic marginalization of Europe. Now, the other comment was also about defense planning, because Jan actually raised the important question about defense planning. There we have a synchronization of defense planning means, of course, that you can decide if you're going to have a common mechanized battalion, you need to procure it together, etc., etc. You need to harmonize the timelines. It's very important, of course, and you have some major gains there. But then my question is, this is why I like NORDEFCO. Why should we start with the most difficult problems from the beginning? Why not build, if you're going to build trust, you should start with the easy gains. And that's why you start with things that are easy to do, and then you can move into a slightly more complicated terrain as you get to know each other. Small is beautiful. That's everyone that I've interviewed in the NORDEFCO project says that it's so much easier in the NORDEFCO setting than in the EU or NATO setting, because it's so many more political wills. And also, a Swedish colleague of mine, he said that don't underestimate the Stockholm syndrome. Once you sit together with a bank robber, after a while you actually start to recognize his pros and cons, and you realize, you see his point of view. So you shouldn't underestimate the Stockholm syndrome, and you need to rub together after a while. Should you send a Danish defense minister today to Helsinki to make a coordination between defense planning, that Danish defense minister would not understand a thing.
Well, thank you very much. Just a brief reaction, because two things, or three things actually, of which I have been talking, have been addressed. First one is the danger of fragmentation caused by exclusive regional cooperation. Well, it seems to me that the problem here is that the different types of regional cooperation can be very different. And on the one hand, I do believe that there are many, many similarities between the two regions which are discussed here today, that really there are many things that make the Nordic region and the Central European region similar and compatible. But actually, one of the differences is that the institutional setup is very different up in the north from what we have here in Central Europe. I would say that the big advantage, or the big success and one of the most defining features of the Nordic defense cooperation is that it has always been concentric, meaning bringing together countries with different institutional arrangements when it comes to multinational defense and security. That simply it is a sort of a tool to bring together countries that are either NATO members or EU members or both. The situation in Central Europe is different. We don't have this issue, which on the one hand is an advantage. that we don't really need to talk too much about the institutional arrangement, because all the 4 countries are members of both NATO and the European Union. But then it seems to me that actually there might be a danger in a region such as Central Europe, that it will develop over time into a sort of an exclusivist, club of a few countries that will be doing things together and actually contribute little to the overall solidarity and cohesiveness of NATO and the European Union. The situation, as I said, the situation in the north is different, because explicitly the Nordic cooperation is meant to be concentric, bringing countries from different institutional arrangements together and actually adding an additional bond in effect, linking the 2 organizations, meaning NATO and EU, together. So that's one thing. Then the successes, or not so big successes, of the Nordic defense cooperation. Of course, I was deliberately contrarian. I deliberately wanted to sound provocative. Of course, that the truth is that the Nordic countries have progressed much more in their regional defense cooperation than what we have achieved so far in Central Europe. On the other hand, when you listen to all the discussions about regional defense cooperation over the past few years, you would probably expect even more than what has been achieved in the Nordic region. For example, you would expect some big procurement project achieved together. You would expect that the Nordic countries would by now have already integrated their airspace protection, their air policing efforts. Of course, there have been many practical steps actually in this direction, such as the joint exercises in Lapland that has been mentioned here. That's all good and nice, but only what I wanted to say is that considering the volume of talking, spent on regional defense cooperation, you would really expect some breakthrough project already having been implemented, and it hasn't come yet. And the third issue, starting with easy things, what has been repeatedly called the low-hanging fruit. That's true. On the other hand, our experience is that actually the successful projects come rather unexpectedly and without being perhaps sometimes planned for in advance, simply as the political and economic situation develops. So just to give you a concrete example, cooperation in air policing is generally considered as the pinnacle of multinational defense cooperation, something so difficult and so sensitive that this may come only in maybe 15, 20 years from now, when the level of trust is really, really high, and that it should be sort of a conclusion of regional defense cooperation. That's the theory, and this is what has been discussed for the past couple of years. But then, suddenly the economic and technological and political situation may develop in a way that actually allows for implementing multinational cooperation in air policing now. And to give you a concrete example, our Slovak friends are now considering actually perhaps maybe buying the same type of aircraft we already use. So it is very imaginable that within a couple of years from now there will be a shared Czech-Slovak air policing, in place. Actually preceding all the other ways of of regional defense cooperation that theoretically are considered as necessary prerequisite for achieving such a complicated and politically sensitive cooperation project as air policing. So yes, in principle or in general, I agree that always it is a good thing to start with easy things and not actually wreck the regional defense cooperation with focusing on the difficult issues first and failing in them. But I'm arguing that sometimes, this is not really planned, deliberately in advance. That it often, follows the situation of the day as it develops, practically. Thank you.
Now, the comments. Did you want to have a question or?
Well. First of all, thank you to the Swedish and Finnish colleague. I think it was a practical contribution to today's debate, and I think you have achieved a lot. And my advice, mostly to the Czech part of the debate, forget about, those great talks about coordinating the defense plans and so on. We are not living in the world of the human design. We are living in the brutal world of the human business action. And if there is some area where the participants of the regional cooperation should urgently think about some action, is what is going to happen in the defense European market. In fact, the upcoming European Council is not going to decide anything about the coordination of defense plan with the relevance for the next 5 years. But most likely, in the shadow, is going to decide a lot about this defense market package number 2. And in the Nordefco, there are at least 2 countries with a substantial defense industry, that's Sweden and Finland. Maybe Norway, I am not the expert on the details. In Visegrad, it's relevant to Poland, Czech Republic, and to a certain extent to Slovakia. In the Benelux, it's certainly related to the Dutch and the Belgians. And, we can have a nice talks and one day to wake up in the world when our defense industries will be totally irrelevant because without the state support and without the freedom of certification, we simply can cease to exist. And I think it is in our vital interest, to on one hand, deepen the European cooperation because we must do this because of the US pivoting, because of the lack of resources. But on the other hand, because we do not know what's gonna happen in 100 years. The empires are rising but declining. That's how we know this continent for 1,000 years. So our interest is to keep something also, some industry on our soil. And here, this is my recommendation, to coordinate, because, for example, what's going to happen is the elimination of the national certification in the military aircraft industry, and with the civilian harmonization already in place, basically for medium and small industries, it's impossible to certify it. Now, we still do have the chance through the military certification process, but once it's going to be harmonized without our influence, then we can have the problem. So this is a practical area where I see an urgent need to coordinate the approaches among the medium-sized states in Europe. Otherwise, it will be dominated by the French, by the Germans, and look what the Poles are going to do. They are now applying for EADS as a shareholder country. But it's something, what the Czechs most likely will not do. So this is our dilemma, whether the total annihilation in future or to keep at least some position inside the game. And here the regional cooperation, I think, is a chance.
our session with Mr. Bontra's welcoming words, and now we can happily go for a small break and continue in about 15 minutes.